Today I want to talk about visual management systems, and it's something that's sort of near and dear to my heart. I've worked with organizations, large and small, trying to create them. I've done most of my work in the lean and agile space. I find that they're extraordinarily valuable for many different types of situations. And I'll pop into the presentation. And Stephanie mentioned that you're welcome to ask questions as we go. So please do. I want to try to make this relatively interactive, even though the medium is a somewhat one-way medium. So if you have questions as we move along, just type them in the box or ask to be unmuted and ask the question. I'm happy to take them as we go along. So let's get started. My title, Visual Management Systems, It's the People, Stupid, is really talking about this idea that we quite often use processes, practices, tools in our work delivering on projects. And fundamentally, every tool, practice, or process has to be put in place to facilitate the interactions of the people delivering the project, program, or product. And this is illustrated very, very strongly by the fact that even in heavy tool delivery models, say a waterfall or a big government contract, when things are potentially not going well, or particularly sticky problems need to be solved, generally people are put into the same room to have conversations. So if we hearken back to the Agile Manifesto, it is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So I'm going to be showing you a bunch of tools today, but remember, it's all about the people. All the tools are there to serve the people's need to get information. So a little bit about me. I'm the chair of the Agile DC conference. It's October 16th this year. It's here in DC. It's a one-day conference, and it's a great conference. It's the community conference, and we'll have about over 50 speakers, 9 tracks, possibly 10 this year, and you'll see lots and lots of great information there. I've been doing Agile now for almost 18 years and doing Agile and Lean exclusively. I'm SVP at LitheSpeed, doing the government practice. We do a ton of enterprise Agile, and one of the things that we quite often do is help teams figure out how to visualize and manage the work that's coming through their organization, be it their team, their program, their line of business, or the entire enterprise. I'm going to show you some examples from some of the work that we've done at our clients. But first, a little background. Quite often we're brought in and people ask us, well, literally, our teams need help. So these conversations happen all the time. And in general, people say, our teams can't deliver projects. We're terrible at delivery. We need Agile so that we can deliver faster. Yay. We can't plan or estimate. We need more training. Yada, yada, yada. I don't want to underestimate our ability the ability of Agile to improve some of these things, but fundamentally, Agile methods, Lean methods are about allowing teams to manage their work and to deliver. Most people in organizations and most organizations are trying to do their best, and given the right information to make decisions, the right tools and processes, quite often they can. So quite often we'll say, so is it a few teams that are having problems? And quite often the people that bring us in say, all of them, it's a problem across our organization. If it's a problem across the organization, then it is not the team's fault. The teams are working within a system within an information space, within an organization, and it is probably not their fault that they're behind. If everyone is struggling, then it's not the team's fault. Quite often, we lack the ability to understand the work that we're bringing into our organization. We have weak product program management that say yes to every request. We start too many projects all at once. The teams are working in a vacuum. They don't know what they should be working on or why they're working on what they're working on, how what they're working on adds value to the organization. And there's no real management system in place. We quite often think of management as how we keep the people working. What we need to think about is how we can build a management system that gives everyone in the organization the information that they need to do the right thing. Here's a quote by Stuart Liff. He does visual management. He's done work in the government and a lot of lean system. So imagine an organization where the physical plant or the space that people work in, the rooms, the factory, the halls, where the physical plant honors the mission, celebrates the employees, shares information, holds people accountable, shapes the outside world's view, and helps drive performance. That would be an organization which uses visual management. I really love that quote because it pulls together this idea that organizations, groups of people are put together to create value and hopefully to enjoy their life as they create value. It's not just to do the work and wonder why it is there to be done. It is to work within a system that values their input and gives them the information they need to do their job. When I say they, I don't mean just the teams, just the teams delivering the work. Scrum talks an awful lot about empowering and allowing teams to self-organize, but I mean the management, the executives, everyone in the organization has the information that they need to hold themselves, other people accountable, celebrate their victories, and allows them to understand the world that they live in. Now, we would not want pilots working in a vacuum. We want to actually deliver them the most information we can, make sure that every piece of information is valuable, accessible, and usable. And what we're going to show is a lot of different systems where people have worked on physical information radiators. I'm not going to show the electronic ones so much, but certainly there are electronic analogs of all of these that many organizations have used. And it's a question that I get all the time. Because I'm going to show you the physical ones because that's where the creative work that we do with teams takes place. We usually design a system physically, mock it up, use it for a while, and when we know it's valuable, then translate it into electronic form. Now, this term visual management is actually one that comes from Lean. So Toyota Production Systems, Taiichi Ohno, Edwards Deming, a lot of people have worked in systems, and they said, you know, the workers need the information to know where the work is and what work needs to be done, and they did a lot of design work, re-engineering of the visual management system at Toyota. So this idea of visual management started in manufacturing and production in lean manufacturing systems, and it really has it's nothing new, but was really made a formal process in Toyota. And even going through the Toyota plants today, you'll see a mix of paper. If you see on that engine block, there's actually a piece of paper there. And there are that's sort of like a checklist of things that need to be done on that engine, even though it's the same for every engine that comes through. In Toyota Production System, they always have a double check, a little checklist, a visual management system to say, make sure that we've done all of these things. On the right, you'll see a visual management system that talks about, that is more a process, manufacturing process system. So lights behind these things will go on if certain conditions happen in the plant. And this idea of starting with paper is an established and proven pattern, even for extraordinarily large programs like the merger of Delta and Northwest. Here is a picture from headquarters in September of 2008, when they were doing some initial roadmap planning for how they might merge 1,200 human, physical, and logistics and technical logistics systems. So here we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of person hours worth of work, where each major project is probably visualized as a single sticky on this board. You might say, how the hell could they do it on a board like this? My question would be, how the hell can you plan a program this big in PowerPoint? Here, multiple people can be working on it, figuring out trade-offs, moving stickies around, and yes, you can be darn sure there was an electronic version of this once the brainstorming was done. But to even get the brainstorming, they needed to be able to move stickies around and make trade-offs so that they could, at 5 months in after the merger, they could cross-fleet air flights. So I book on Northwest, and all of a sudden I'm on a Delta plane. It was very important for their merger to be able to start to merge the operations of those two airlines. So, you know, I know a lot of people, especially in IT, say, hey, that's super old school. You know, it's awfully quaint with your blue tape, your stickies, but just understand that a lot of people use it. So I'm going to be talking about the different levels, and I'm going to be showing some real physical boards, and I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about each one at each level, and then I want to make sure I leave some time for questions at the end. So if for some reason you have a question along the way, please ask it then, because I really do want to get some interaction if possible. So team level. One of the things, so here we're talking about a Scrum team. One of the things that a lot of teams struggle with is figuring out where their work is. They're usually pretty good at tracking the current iteration, and they may have a physical board or an electronic board for that current iteration, but they rarely know how things are progressing in their backlog, what's ready for the next few sprints. So this team visualized everything as a flow from left, getting progressively more detailed so that it could drop into the current iteration. And they had this idea that after the current iteration, the stories, the features, the things that they were working on would go to work. So they used an analogy of how do we get our children ready to go to work, and they treated every card as if it was going through school. So in this first column that you see was called the new card nursery, things that have been mentioned. This is just trying to figure out, is this worth doing? New ideas can drop in there. And then after the nursery, either they would defer them and put them in a parking lot, or say, no, we're never going to do this. Or they say, yes, we want to see if this is a viable thing, and they would send it to preschool. At preschool, they would start to detail out some basic information on that feature. They'd try to get some rough order of magnitude estimates. They'd try to figure out what other teams would they depend on, would they have dependencies with. Do they need to get security involved to look at this prior to building it? Do they need to change anything on the back end? Might they need one of the enterprise teams to build an API for them to use? Just try to get their heads around that initial analysis of that card. Then after preschool, so they did some basic research and got items together for preschool, and then after that, they would send it to elementary school, junior high, and high school. And for each one of these, they would get greater and greater detail, getting those cards ready. This is before any sprint happened, that backlog grooming. You'll also see that right below that, they tracked technical debt, things that they believed they wanted to fix, items where they had deferred maintenance that they needed to do, or there were things that they wanted to clean up in their architecture. Because all of these things that were in elementary, junior, high school, and technical debt were moving their way closer to a current sprint. So from high school, those are all items that are ready for, in this case, they were ready for iteration 15. That is the next iteration that is going to be happening. And then in junior high, those were the stories that were ready for iteration 16. And elementary school was ready for, or getting ready for, iteration 17. So anyone in the team could visually look up there and say, do we have enough stories to keep us busy for the next 3 sprints? And that was a really important thing, because they're building their current iteration, they're keeping busy building stuff, but if they end their sprint and they don't have work to work on, then they'll hit a bubble that they won't be able to work anymore. So they always spent part of their current sprint making sure that they had enough work ready for the next 3 sprints. So there are a couple of different versions of this. One team did next sprint, the sprint after that, and then the sprint after that. And they also talked about this idea of a 3 amigos discussion. And for this team, that meant product owner, QA, and development, making sure they had all had a conversation about what that meant to be ready and done. So this idea of a user story having acceptance criteria and everyone understanding it. They said before anything gets into a sprint, we're going to have make sure that all 3 of those teams have talked about it. The testing, development, and product owner BA team. And that means that they have talked together, not individually. They've all gotten together and talked about that story. All visually managing things to get ready for the current iteration. So, and you'll see different types of Kanban boards in current iterations, visually managing work along tasks. So these are, again, 2 different teams. One of the things that you'll see is they had more stages than just 3 columns, ready, in process, and done. That can be sufficient for many teams, and that's fine. But they wanted to visually manage work across the board. Now, in this board, you'll see something interesting right there. That blue line. Oops, sorry, let me go back. Technology failure. Let me go back. When you when we see that that blue line right here going across the board, that was to indicate what was in the next release. Anything above the line went into a certain branch, and they actually had the branch numbers written with arrows below and arrows above. Can't quite see that. But anything above the line when they're in development, they had to check it into the release branch. Anything below the line was checked into the team's branch for the next release or some future release. So there they visually managed what was checked in where. Now, luckily, these teams happen to be co-located, so these sorts of visual management systems work quite well. Okay. Oop. I'm stuck in pointer land. Okay. I do not want pen color. Okay. Okay.
Bob, I think you gotta erase the little line first.
I'm not sure. A little line is there. How do I erase? Erase all drawings. Okay. Yep. I've got it. Erase all drawings. Okay. So quite often people will also visualize the work coming in to their backlog. So these are just ideas. These are not even in current development, but they're managing work through their backlog grooming, their backlog prioritization as opportunities, things they might want to work on in the future. And this is where they're getting UX, UE people involved to run experiments, maybe do prototypes, get those prototypes in front of people to get them ready to drop into development. So this is a Kanban board for discovery. And here's another way of showing that we saw a team do their current iteration. So stories at the top, tasks in yellow stickies, boxes on the sticky filled to indicate how far along the work was. So you'll see some of these stickies have boxes that are empty, some are fully filled in, and some are partially filled in. So that allows them to track the progress of the tasks, and red card is for blockers. These sorts of visual management systems are really easy to work with, and the key is all of the information is available, just like a pilot cockpit. Over on the right of this picture, you have the senior product manager working with another product owner to talk about what's in the current release. That was the team that had the above line. So all those cards that they're pointing at are going into the current release, and they're up having a conversation about that release. Below, you'll see the team gathered around having a conversation about some of the next sprints that were coming up and what was in those sprints, possibly having that Three Amigos conversation that you see at the top of the wall. Because all of these tools are fundamentally about the people. Remember, it's always about the people making information available so that they can have the conversation, get the information that they need to do the work that they need to do. So a lot of people also track burn up charts or burn down charts. This bump up, that could have been a scope change. We added scope. I much prefer, this burn down chart. I much prefer burn ups where the total work, the scope, are you still?
We lost the screen there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I'm trying to share it now. Are you able to see it?
Yep.
Some people will use burn ups on the wall or burn downs to track progress. They might have multiple releases and track multiple releases on the same burn up. They might do cumulative flow diagrams and physically draw these on the board. In this example, the team was required to make sure somebody was keeping track of what was not started, what was in development, what was in test, and how much of that work had been done during the sprint. And a list of other activities competing for attention. When we talk about teams self-organizing around the work within their current Scrum sprint, that's what it means. They keep track of the information, they replan their work, they track the distractions, so that it is not the Scrum Master or the manager saying, hey, we're running behind. They should be able to see how close they are to being done. Now they're already done with Thursday. They've got probably about 10 points done with 32 to go. Right now they have in development probably about 12 points worth of work, and they've not yet started on about 10 points of work. I can see that just from this visual chart. So I'd say they're probably okay, but would be nice if by next Monday they had about half of their work done so that they could get all the way there. And here's a finished cumulative flow diagram that one of our teams did. Questions about team level? If not, I can move on to program level.
Nothing right now, Bob.
Okay, excellent. So program level, here we're talking about organizing across teams. What we need to look at the program or portfolio level is how many projects, how many pieces of work do we have in flight? Like how many are in planning, how many have started delivery, how many have, are through the sort of intake process of understanding what that is, how many are currently in build and deployment. And a lot of times teams will have too many things in process. This is an example where it's a team that has 12 simultaneous projects for a 10-person team. It wasn't even, the program level wasn't even aware that this team was being split so many different ways. Making that visible at the program and portfolio level came in and brought the program managers in and say, we need priorities. We need to concentrate on no more than 4 or 5 things, and we want to put some stuff on hold to focus and get those 4 or 5 things done. What do you want us to focus on? And the program level managers did that prioritization. Quite often it's helpful to have a fixed cadence across teams. So each one of these is a given team that has multiple information, that they're multiple projects that they're potentially working on and releasing. Here's another example of a portfolio alignment wall where each one of these fluorescent green cards is a feature being delivered. Now, the row is not a team. The row is a major organizational initiative, like a new product or a new feature that needed to be rolled out that affected many different teams. You'll actually see each one of the non-yellow cards has a little sticky in the side, and that indicated which team needed to deliver that piece. And this board was used to track feature delivery, and finalization delivery is represented by the yellow cards, the fluorescent yellow cards, and team dependencies like APIs that they needed to deliver to another team, or the front-end development that needed to be integrated between 2 teams. You'll see right in that column 323 to 43. Second column down, there's a card that has 2 teams on it. That's 2 teams working together on a cross-team integration program. And this wall, we had teams and program management getting together twice a week for a program level scrum of scrums. Each team would say, here's what we're delivering this sprint. Here's what we need from other teams, what's in our way, what's working. And we also had some waterfall teams represented on this board, and their project manager would come in with their Microsoft Power, Microsoft Project or whatever tool they were using to track progress.
We have an incoming question.
What's that? Okay.
When doing discovery with product and UX to meet the definition of ready, and then delivery with engineering QA to meet the definition of done, how do you avoid devolving into a gated waterfall process with two teams disconnected from each other?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You work in small batches, and because that can easily happen, and quite often with UX teams, they work almost as if they were an external agency. They work in big batches, throw it over the wall, and hope for the best, because quite often they have worked to make sure it's usable and valuable. When it gets to the team, that's when the team figures out that it is feasible. So in the example that we showed, the UX and product owner team doing discovery were working on the same sprint cycle. They were there at the stand-up talking about what experiments they were working on. They would work on small experiments, and then immediately they would drop into the team because the UX designer also had was the web front-end designer. So that particular person on that particular team was able to go out and do discovery work, do prototypes and do customer interviews, and then drop directly into the team to help the team implement and design it. They also would include the team in discussions of the experiments they were going to run to make sure that they would be feasible and developable. So the way to keep it from turning into a waterfall is to work in small batches, get feedback early, and make sure that the people that need to build it are interacting on a daily, weekly basis with the people figuring out what we should build. And that is actually sometimes referred to as dual track Agile. So you'll look at, rather than a big batch getting thrown over the wall, teams are working hand in hand to discover and deliver value quickly. And then the beautiful thing about that is we might be able to have the user experience folks say, could we run a quick A/B test on these two different ways of developing the interface? The development team quickly implements it and is involved in the measurement, figuring out user behavior, which helps inform the decision of which way we want to go with finally. So it really does close the loop, allowing the people to build it, that are building it, have a greater understanding of why we're building it, why it's valuable, and the people trying to understand what we should build and understand why it's valuable have a richer understanding of what are the implications for the team when we build this thing.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Another thing that we've seen teams do is to visualize team health. So each one of these rows is a given team, and within the teams are required to keep these red, amber, green indicators going in their team. So they're required, the team itself, not the manager, not the scrum master doing some secret report that goes up to management. The team is required with very clear guidelines about what red, yellow, or amber, and green mean within their team. They needed to keep, does the team have the right skills? And are they working overtime? So team health, those were two of those bubbles. Are they on scope and on budget with the current project? And do they have work for the next 2 months to keep them busy coming into the team? So here they created stable teams, and they would go out to the lines of business to get work and bring into the team. So these indicators said, how is the team doing with their skills, and are they working at a sustainable pace? How are they doing on scope and budget with their current project? And do they have enough work to keep them busy in the future? And in this organization's, red was encouraged. Red meant management would come down and help rather than coming down and pound the hell out of you with a hammer and beat you. So red, like in any lean system, we want to find out as early as possible that there may be an issue. So red in this organization was encouraged. And in fact, when something happened and caused a team to go red, work would end up on the management accountability board. This was the program management and the management that went across different programs. When a team was in trouble, work would drop on this board, the backlog, and you see particular pictures of particular managers and what issue they're working. This was physically in the space that the management team had a daily stand-up to say what was blocking their team's delivery and how are they working on it. Teams that had items on this board were encouraged to send a rep if the thing was urgent or if they had new information or a brand new blocker that was critical. I mean, the general rule was anybody could show up at this stand-up any time, but they were especially encouraged to show up at the management stand-up to see what was happening if they had something critical that was blocking them, so that the teams were directly linked with the managers that were supporting them. That's real visual management. That is real project, program management. This is not about managing people. This is about managing the work, visualizing the work, visualizing the impediments, and creating quite a great deal of accountability for teams and accountability for their management. Kent Beck, one of the creators of extreme programming, said autonomy, which we talk about a lot in Agile, autonomy without accountability is just vacation. So if we want to give teams autonomy, we want to say, we will help you. They need to be accountable for bringing up problems. We need to be accountable as managers, as organizations, for helping them. And we can allow a great deal of autonomy and flexibility once everyone is doing a quality job and everybody knows where the work is. Now we're going to move up to enterprise level. So here we're talking about cross-program, cross-project initiatives. This might be within a line of business or potentially even across several lines of business. So if you think of a major bank or financial services institution, you might have commercial lending. You might have private lending. You might have commercial credit card and loans. You might have private credit card. You might have mortgage loans. You might have small business loans. You might have different lines of business represented, or it might be across an entire organization. So this board was created with major organizational initiatives. So these were major projects that would drop down into these programs. Each pie slice is a different part of the business. Like you can see that there's HR, there's other pieces of organizational silos and what they're working on around the outside. And then each one of these pie slices is the work that is 1 year out, 3 months out, or I'm sorry, 3 quarters out, 6 months out, 3 months out, 1 month out, and in progress. So anything outside, completely outside the circle is a year. Anything in that first ring is 3/4 out. Anything in the second ring in is 6 months out. 3 months out is the third ring in, and anything in that is either up next or currently in process. So the ring right around the bullseye is in process. Visualizing what major projects are running through these lines of business so that the leaders of all these departments can look and see where are things in flight, what are the dependencies. If one thing gets moved, do I have dependencies in the other lines of business? The color coding also meant something for this team and might relate to different customer experiences or products. I don't remember exactly what the color meant in this particular example that we built. But each section is a different line of business. Now the beautiful thing here is the middle is small. You can only fit so many stickies in there before it looks crowded. If it looks crowded, your organization may have too much work in progress. You'll see a lot of people talk about WIP. It is extraordinarily easy to add another line to a spreadsheet or to a Microsoft project. It is not so easy to get 50 stickies to stick on a little piece of the board. As humans, we are much better able to manage information we can see rather than information we can't see. A clear example, people that want to get a hold of their debt sometimes switch to cash rather than credit card, because a credit card is money you can't see, and cash you actually have to pull it out, count it out, and hand it to someone. It is a lot easier to spend on credit or to add another project when it is easy and not physically visible in your space. Here's is another listing of multiple projects. These are smallish bundles of work, not a huge product, but maybe a feature or maybe 4 or 5 features that are going to be delivered. And this is around a customer experience. How is the customer viewing this system or these different systems? And in fact, you'll see the different systems are represented by different colored cards on this wall. In the same way that if you're an Apple fanboy like me, you don't think of Apple as just the iPhone. You think of the integrated experience across iPhone, iPad, possibly the music service, and some other physical device you might have, including Apple TV or a laptop. So you might think of one of these rows as iTunes. And if you thought of that as your row, or the music experience, you might have iTunes, you might have Apple TV, you might have desktop and laptop represented as a different color across, and different features or bundles of features being developed. And this allows the organization to understand where things are and make trade-offs, because there's only so much work that can be done in an organization. You need to focus on things and get them through this pipeline from not prioritize to prioritize, discover, refine, and then you'll see over on that last area, well, you can't see, is where it is in delivery, and then when is it going to be released. That's a picture of their 2017 release schedule across those different those different lines, where a given line might have multiple releases in a given month. So I wanted to leave some time for questions. I'm going to show you a few extras that I have, and then I'll leave at least 10 minutes worth of, I have put some things in the appendix so that we could take a look at them, and then I'll leave 10 minutes for questions. So I'll zip through these pretty quickly. Some people do, sort of mad, sad, medium, or glad. They'll do sort of daily management across their sprints. One team we had named their releases after fish internally, so they would have a date. This is the November 14th release, and then they would show what major features were going in that release. When it was going into integration test system test AT and production deployment. So that indicated they had additional activities after the team was done in their delivery pipeline and when those dates were. So at any time, someone could look up and say, the upcoming releases, what are the dates? And what's in that release? Release plan, story map, an example. Here's one for onboarding training, where we would have things that you needed to learn about the program or the process, whether it's Agile, where your source code repository was, maybe a brief about what the application did. When every time a new team member would come in, we would set all these back to the backlog, and they would make sure that they learned them over a couple of weeks or months, and we would prioritize that with their development manager. Here's another intake where discovery team was doing test and learn, and they wanted to make sure that what they had put over into planning and the things that they had killed. Because the great thing about ideation and discovery is it's not about the work that you do, it's making sure that you pick only those things that are valuable and kill the things that are not valuable to your team. This is a strategic priorities and sort of issues. Red, green, yellow for those different issues, who was on the team, completed in build, and this again was an intake team, a team doing discovery, dropping work down into other teams. Here's a UX board with different, it's called tanagram exercises, where they have little different snippets that people use to review sprint results. And I think that is it. And I've got a bunch of things that I need to snooze. So questions, thoughts?
Yeah, we've got a couple in here. Thanks, Bob. So the first question, how long would these bi-weekly meetings run? I recently saw a director VP level group doing this exercise 3 times a week, but it ran more than an hour and a half. Too long, I thought, for the whole group. I prefer to keep it shorter and then keep specific people or sub-teams for breakouts.
Yeah, because you're pulling the leads away from delivery. So, I mean, I'd have to look at the context, right? My gut reaction is that's probably too long. When we did them in that particular program, we were able to get through the information in a half hour. We scheduled everyone to be there for a half hour, and then we scheduled a half-hour work after meeting, so that as part of that stand-up, going through each team and saying, what do we work on, what do we block, or do we need to replan based on new priorities or things that have changed in the program, then whoever needed to stay back and work that would. And quite often we'd have them report out what their decisions were if it impacted the program at the next stand-up. So, you know, they should be as short as possible, but no shorter, right? You want to make sure the outcomes are that everyone gets the information, they have time to understand and to understand the implications of that information, to understand who they need to work with to make trade-offs. But I've also seen some of these program levels, the meetings rush through to the point where everyone, it was sort of perfunctory. It was a output only and no real negotiation came out. We're trying to get some rich interactions. So keep it short, make sure we're getting the outcomes that we want, and that is good understanding of where things are, identification of blockers, and people replanning, keeping their eye on the entire program goal. But so don't keep, there's such a thing as too short, and there's definitely such a thing as too long. My gut reaction is an hour and a half is probably too long 3 times a week. Because that's a half a day. That's like, that is 10% of the delivery time of the people that are there. Now that may be right if there's a lot of things changing. I was in a program where they had a daily cross-program pull-up that was a half hour a day. And, you know, it was necessary because things were changing that rapidly. So keep it short, but no shorter.
All right. Cool. So the next thing here is more of an elaboration, I think. So in pertaining to the board with the red, green, and amber colors on it.
Okay.
In my lean experience, we did not encourage amber statuses. Green was good or on plan. Red needed help or discussion. We avoided saying red was negative. So could you elaborate more on those colors and kind of how they can incorporate?
Sure, and I'm totally fine if you boil it down to red and green. I think that could you read the last part about encourage?
Yeah, so green was good or on plan, red needed help or discussion, and we avoided saying red was negative.
That's perfect. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Here the PMO was used to green is good, doesn't need help. Yellow is we think we're trending towards needing help and maybe a discussion is warranted. And red meant we have blockers or issues that are keeping us from working. And actually, you'll see here the teams really used red and green mostly. So I think yellow became a little bit meaningless. That being said, they did have concrete criteria for each one of those to say what constituted red, yellow, and green. So it is those concrete criteria that allowed it to transfer information, but honestly, most programs were only really interested in the green and the red. So I agree that green and red may be sufficient. Sometimes it is hard to break the habits of a program that is used to red, yellow, green.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Next question. I currently have teams using all kinds of boards throughout the company. Is it okay not to be uniform in our use, or will this eventually lead to miscommunication on our value delivery?
I honestly think it depends. And let me clarify, because that's one of those classic consulting answers that I think doesn't give enough information. So in this organization, the teams were required to have certain elements in their room. And the required elements was agreed to by the entire organization, that anybody should be able to walk in and they would have these red, amber, green in their team room. They would have the data that supports red, amber, green, and they would have their team's velocity and a quality metric. And they would also be required to have written up the next the 2 or 3 process improvement, because they were a big continuous improvement shop, items that the team was working on. So those were the items that got rolled up to management and executives. So they needed to be uniform so that if the CIO walked into a team room, he or she would know that those were the items they could expect to see in the team room. They were also required, the teams were required to keep that information up themselves, not the Scrum Master. And in fact, the test of that was, they were a lean organization, so the CIO or the SVP of a given area was required by their operating model to walk into the rooms on a periodic basis. CIO would walk in once a year, and the deal was the CIO should be able to walk up to any person on the team, ask about the metrics, and get a coherent answer. Because lean systems say if you're measuring a team, then the metrics you roll up, the team is responsible for maintaining those metrics so that it drives the team behavior to understand what that means and how they're being reported. Now, in those teams, those were the elements that were required. The other stuff they tracked was completely up to them. How they tracked their current sprint, how they tracked product discovery, the sprint metrics, whether they wanted to burn up, burn down. They were only required to track their sprint to sprint velocity in a standard way, but how they tracked their current sprint was up to them. How they visualized dependencies with other teams was up to them. How they got their product backlog ready, whether they wanted a team calendar up, whether they wanted, sad, mad, glad, whether they wanted, a kudos board where people could put up a sticky that said, thanks, Stephanie, you really helped with facilitation of that meeting. So they made an organizational decision of what was required as standardization and what was flexible. And honestly, that line, I've seen it go from organizations where everything was standardized, and I think that's maybe a little too much, to everything was up to the team. And sometimes that's a little too much because I can't, as another person, understand what's happening in that team. So where the pendulum, where that right level of, swinging that pendulum from really strict to really loosey-goosey, there's probably a nice middle area that makes sense. So work with your teams, figure out what the rest of the organization is interested in, and negotiate that line and be willing to experiment with different levels of standardization versus customization. Because we want teams to be able to have enough freedom. But we also want freedom is allowed when there's visibility and transparency. Those are also Agile values. So we want the information to be transparent out to the rest of the organization, not just hidden inside our team.
Awesome, thanks for that explanation. So we are getting to the top of the hour here. We're gonna continue to take all of these questions that are coming in. We definitely have a couple here. But I just wanted to say thanks for attending the webinar, everybody, and we hope that you enjoyed it and you learned something. And if you are looking for our next webinar, it is on August 18th, and we've got Raj and Dougla and Mario Sylvia. They'll be digging into big room planning, and you guys will be getting the registration link for that webinar following this one. Also want to point out that we are getting into conference season. So LitheSpeed is headed to Agile 2017 soon, and we would love to see you in Orlando, giving away some cool prizes. Bob and I are going to be hosting LitheSpeed's first Agile Leadership podcast, actually LitheSpeed's first podcast in general. But if you're looking for maybe a conference that's closer to the DC area, We have the Agile DC Executive Summit coming right around the corner as well. That's on September 13th. And we've got an awesome lineup for you this year. Our theme is Agile Digital Transformation, and we've got really a fantastic lineup. So details on that will be coming to you after the webinar as well. And
Yep.
speaking of executives, we are getting ready to launch year 2 of the Agile Leadership Academy. Bob is one of our awesome coaches for that. And if you are interested, it's on September 11th and 12th of this year is our first workshop. And without giving too much away, the ALA is kind of the perfect solution for Agile executives to really, start paving the way for disruption, digital transformation, agility in the enterprise. Some more details on registration for those classes are heading your way as well. And if you're interested in digging into any of the topics that Bob covered today, you guys are going to get the link to the recording of this webinar and all of our contact information following as we close. And as always, we will stick around. We're going to answer some more of these questions. So feel free to stay and chat with us just a little bit. We'll be available, but if not, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and just a quick add-on. Thanks, everybody. I will stick around to answer some questions, and the conference season also extends to Agile DC.
Yes.
And while the podcast is LitheSpeed's first podcast, you can. I'm also rebooting the Agile Toolkit podcast at Agile 2017, and you can just Google that Agile Toolkit podcast. You'll find great interviews and recordings starting in about 2005 and more to come. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. All right, so going on to our next question here. How do you effectively use physical Kanban boards that are in one location with a team that's remote? For instance, most of our team is in Virginia, but one of the teams is in Texas. We must engage daily in discovering, planning, grooming, etc.
So there are a couple of answers to that. Either both teams maintain a physical board, or you use an electronic tool like LeanKit Kanban, or some other virtual tool that will track the work on the wall. If you have a distributed team, you're going to inevitably rely more on electronic boards. You may want to design them and try them out as physical boards first. One of the ways I've seen with distant teams that wanted to keep track of things moving across in a physical way is the teams always had a web camera open on a monitor in the corner of the room. Whenever somebody moved something on a physical board, they would call someone over, let them know what moved to what square, and have them physically move it. In general, though, the physical boards for teams that we work with are often backed up by electronic boards. So during the current sprint or the current work, sometimes they'll drop down into physical, but they'll usually have an ID that links back to another electronic system. So those are just a couple of strategies. Go completely digital, have some combination, or completely physical, and make sure that you're communicating readily between rooms to update the rooms of the status. You can, because I can tell you, you can move a card in Jira and the remote team won't know it. Here, if you have the web open and you require them to move the card or make sure they move everything at the daily stand-up, then they will actually know that it moved.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next question. How does an organization's business strategy and operational goals affect agility? For example, a startup seeking product market fit has a lot less to lose than a successful medium-large business generating millions per month. Put another way, what factors do you consider when customizing an approach for growth companies compared to companies focused on operational effectiveness?
Well, honestly, I think the strategies are quite often the same, but but your outcomes are different. If I were in if I were in a new startup looking for growth, I would not be experimenting in discovery on this number of things in all likelihood. I'm going to be focused on, very laser focused on the next thing that will move the needle on revenue, adoption, or whatever market growth strategy you need. Maybe it's partner, getting more partners, bringing more customers on board, getting more organic referrals from other people. Whatever my growth strategy is, I'm going to have a lot fewer things that I'm working on. My teams, I will inevitably have smaller teams, and I need that feedback rapidly to say, will this move the needle? If I have a large program and I've got cash buffer, I may, in fact, be running a lot of things in parallel, and I may not need to be as laser focused because none of these things are going to make or break me. Now, I say that knowing that one of the biggest problems large organizations have, and you actually pointed out what it is, they're making too much money to innovate. They have too much buffer. They can actually act in an extraordinarily irresponsible way with lots of sloppy thinking and not go broke. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we have trying to drive change into organizations is nothing will blow up if they stay the same. Now, that's not a bad place to be as an organization, and I wouldn't want to be in an organization that is going to go out of business tomorrow if we don't make this next sale. But I also know that the amount of turnover on the Fortune 500 shows me very clearly that these giants of industry may, in fact, be sitting on, an environmental disaster where the world is changing around them and they're comfortable doing business as usual until they're eventually driven to extinction by a disruptive startup that does have these tools and the ability to change. We have organizations that have explicitly stated, like, for example, Capital One has publicly said, we are a digital organization. We're going to do everything we can to innovate as rapidly as we can. Now, granted, they're sitting on a reasonable amount of buffer of capital, but they say, if we want to remain relevant, competitive, and kill our competition, then we need to act more like the hungry startup that's scratching for survival than the lumbering giant that has millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and could, to be honest, Capital One as an organization could sit on their money and ride it out. I know there are lots of financial organizations that are moving to that model because they want to innovate, they want to be able to create disruption from within their organization rather than reacting solely to disruption that's coming from the outside.
Awesome, great. And I think we just have one more question here. Other than trial and error, how do you suggest choosing a visual management system that works for my team?
So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this is to give a whole bunch of different tools, show different ways of doing it. One of the ideas that I like to start with is, what are the outcomes? What do we want to be able to, what decisions will we want to make? Who's going to be interacting with that board? And asking what are the outcomes? And then when I design, I quite often prototype on 11 by 17 or maybe newsprint size, the flip chart size paper, and I might work with one or two people and say, what are the outcomes? And I kind of work backwards from there and say, what's the information we want to show on this board? And then I use this thinking tool, which I learned about on one of my podcasts, which is TIP, token. So what are we showing? What are the cards? What are the little pieces that we're moving across the board? And that token has a shape, it has a color, something that can be viewed away from the board. If I have a stop sign on a card, I know that's a blocker. Stuff that I can see visually away from the board, and that's information that our executives or managers will want to see. Inscription, what is written on those tokens? What are the details? And they might have links out to even greater details in an electronic system. They might have a team name. They might have indication of other team dependencies. What have I written on it that will be a reminder of that greater story, that greater conversation, that link out to the details? Because I won't be able to fit all the details on the thing. So the token is something I can see from away from the board. The inscription, I need to move closer, and that's valuable for the teams or the the individuals working the details of any given item. And then placement. What physical board, what physical space am I putting it on? And are there columns and rows? Are there circles? Are there intersecting circles? I might draw a Venn diagram to show lines of business and features that I want to deliver. If I deliver this feature, it affects customer service and mobile. If I release this feature, it hits customer service, mobile, and web, or some other way of, so the placement, so TIP, token, inscription, and placement. You can experiment with different things, and the great thing about doing it physically is it takes less than a day to tear it down and try a new strategy. Make sure that you're having a quick continuous improvement meeting or retro on how's the board working. And in several organizations, we've had information Fridays. So at the end of the day, people would bring in beverage of their choice. They'd take an hour, pop soda, beer, wine, whatever they wanted, and they would walk around and they would look and we had conversations about, is this information stale? Does it need to be updated? If so, someone would volunteer to update it. Do we want to change it? And do we want to run another experiment and possibly a different way of doing it? And then if they got done with that hour early, then people would go home early or hang out and just chat on a Friday afternoon. Just add a little bit of slack and a little bit of fun and relaxation, but talk about the process, not what we're doing, but how are we managing it? How are we visually managing it? And that can include the electronic tools as well. So I like to experiment in physical boards, but that is a luxury of co-location quite often. And don't be afraid to have that same behavior on your electronic tools. It's just a little harder to tear it down and experiment with a new way. It's a little harder to configure Jira for these workflows than to put up new columns and headers. So that's why I like to experiment physically before I drop down into a final electronic version. And that can happen quickly. That can happen over a few weeks or a month before we go full electronic or some hybrid.